Hello, I'm Blaž Zafošnik. I come from company VR. I help manufacturing companies implement and deploy REWO. Together with me today is Matt Mayfield. Matt, you work in engineering, business development. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thanks, Blaž. I think as it pertains today, my background, as you said, is electrical engineering, and I grew up in manufacturing with companies like Honeywell in the steel industry. I've also been in SaaS industry for various companies, as well as in recent years, I've been on boards that are doing manufacturing and sort of seeing the world from the other side of this.
So Matt, what are the current macro trends in manufacturing?
So I think, and again, I'm talking more, we of course have trends like in what's happening in Asia and Europe and the US, and of course this is all fairly fluid. But I think there's a couple big trends. So for example, we saw in the past, 5 years, the importance of domestic manufacturing in Europe. So you definitely see interest in growing and maintaining manufacturing both in Europe and the US. And we'll see how concrete this turns into. But there's been a trend to offshoring to China has been the big macroeconomic one for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of reversed starting really around COVID and now has some political trends that direction. The second thing you see is with workers, big changes here, right? So manufacturing is now highly automated. And I think this is another big trend that changes things. You know, something like steel manufacturing has very, very little labor, right? It's heavy in automation. And the question is, why does that need to be in China?
Yeah, also that's also probably the insourcing. So we were outsourcing everything to China. Now we're insourcing also because of the automation. Now you need engineers. You don't need manual labor anymore.
So, you know, in my past, this was one of the big things you saw a difference in a factory in China versus a factory, say, in Sweden, is the technicians. And this is something macroeconomically or macro level that's an issue, which is United States and Europe. Generally, the young ones are not particularly interested in becoming technicians. Mm. What they're interested in is doing a full PhD, work on the CAD system, or they want to, make money doing high frequency trading. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to get people who are interested in actually understanding technology and being able to pick up a tool. That category of person was, we were swimming in these people post-World War II. And that's continued a fairly strong decline that's been accelerating. And that makes a big problem. You see this everywhere in the trades. As we look out at things like AI-proof business is probably manufacturing, but I think we're just realizing that now, that that's actually an attractive place to be. So workforce is a major issue, right? The attractiveness of workforce in Europe and the US is a major problem. Just that it's a very small pool of people, which means from a production standpoint, I need less of them, but I need more educated ones. That's important, and I need them to be stable. And so I'm working from a fairly small pool. I think the second thing that comes in there is there's less young ones to start with, right? This is a demographic change. We're going from the number of workers that are age 40 and above versus the number of workers that are age 30 and below. That ratio has never been worse in history, and is basically continuing to get worse. So mm-hmm. This is a real issue, that there's a fight for that talent. And that brings up the next thing, which is Europe has been facing this already for quite some time. US is starting to have to deal with this. And other places like Japan really hasn't dealt with it well. This has been a major problem. But what you see is Europe's answer has been mostly through immigration. You see large numbers of immigrants going into manufacturing in, say, Germany. That's really, really common. And that brings its own thing. So one of the good news is that in a lot of these countries, as you go from wealthy and highly developed to less wealthy and less developed, you see the attractiveness of these types of jobs that changes. Mm-hmm. So you see that there's somebody who's interested in working in an automated packing facility that comes from Syria, but you don't see it when they come from Nuremberg in the same extent. And so one of the big issues is, how do you deal with an immigrant workforce, right? Low skill, So we've built our manufacturing, especially in Europe and especially sort of the German model, has all been sort of based on this idea of apprenticeship and expertise. And then the Japanese sort of changed a lot of that in the 90s to a more procedural process, continuous improvement model. But that whole model still requires that we invest and we can communicate. And once you start to talk about immigrant workforce with limited language skills on a very specific matters, that's when things start to break down a lot.
Yeah. So basically, the upskilling in different language, that's problematic. And we also face a problem. You mentioned that already. So European manufacturing was highly dependent on immigration, and because the problem is the post-war generation is now retiring, has a lot of knowledge, but we need to find an efficient way how to transfer the knowledge to the younger generation, and the transfer needs to be different. It needs to be more visual. We learn visually now.
We do learn visually, and that I want to just start with that transfer. That is a really big issue, right? And what you see is a lot of, there's certain tasks that become really problematic, right? Maintenance. We again talked about technicians. So you not only need a technician who knows how to use a soldering iron and can reconfigure the mechanics of something, but you need somebody who has the experience to understand how this particular machine works. And that takes time, right? So it's not only do we need somebody that knows how to repair a car, we need somebody who knows how to repair a water-cooled Porsche rear engine 993, right? That's two different things. That takes time and energy and communication. And kind of going back to your second point, you asked about visualization, and obviously this is you guys' expertise, is if you just take a look at where is the biggest body of work of how to do something. Where is the biggest how-to? Your dishwasher filter clogs. Where do you go? Traditionally, you'd pull out the manual. Later, you'd take a look at the PDF online manual. Later, you might look at a forum. But today, it's all on YouTube, TikTok, right? 100%. If I want to figure out how do I clean my filter on my dishwasher, that is the only place I'm really going to look. And that's a huge change. Now, my father still doesn't operate that way, but certainly I do. And certainly younger people, my kids, if they want to do a recipe of how to cook something, they don't even look at text. Text isn't interesting at all to them. It's pure video. How do you make a souffle, right? First of all, I don't know what 12-year-olds are doing making souffles, but again, with the idea that you can see it, somebody explaining it in video steps, they're doing it. And that's amazing, because me at 12, that never would have been possible. For them, this is just completely normal and natural that they reach big and do it right out of the box big.
Yeah, YouTube nowadays is the biggest database of work instructions. It's probably the biggest knowledge base in the world. So it's the source where most of the, especially younger generation, searches for the knowledge. Yeah, I agree. And
I would go into, just fake information, what's real, what's not real. A video, we have much more credibility. That's the other reason, right? The amount of SEO garbage that's in a video is way lower than the SEO garbage that's written text. And this is also, I think, probably the thing that's driving us there. Again, once you get used to it, that's what you want, right? I don't want to see the written directions for how to change the filter. That'll just be confusing. I want to see somebody actually do it, because there's so much more information conveyed. But here's the interesting thing. So some of the things I'm seeing in the market is you see that older people who are more experienced, they're used to paper. This is always the problem, right? If you're used to a vinyl record, you want a vinyl record. And what we have is this huge problem where we need to transfer knowledge from one generation to the other. And if your manufacturing facility is in investment mode, this is a problem you're already facing. If your manufacturing is not in investment mode, then what you're trying to do is sort of cling and hold on to those people as long as you possibly can, with the idea that, I don't know, maybe one day you actually move the facility or deal with that problem later.
Yeah, so you kind of made an introduction to the one more point I want to mention. So basically, fluctuation is getting higher and higher. Basically, companies can quickly estimate how much time they need to invest into a worker to upskill, train the worker. And from that point, it's basically a break-even point when the worker starts earning money for the company. It's not a cost anymore. But with the higher fluctuation, the time workers spend at the company is decreasing, and that means the profitability or is basically a more problematic.
Sure. But what you're saying is actually not new to any industry, right? We could say people who are doing mechanical design or people who are packing, people working in a grocery store. I think that fundamentally there's higher churn, right? This first happened in the United States. Now we're seeing it in Europe, right? This idea of working for life at the same company, that's changed. I mean, I imagine, have not worked in one company your entire life. I certainly haven't. I've worked in many. And that's just, that's not the new normal. Is you don't take a company for life. That's been for a while. No new news there. But here's where it's different is in manufacturing again. There was this huge shift that happened in the 90s. And this is probably, before your time, or maybe this is interesting for people who are not hardcore manufacturing people. But there was an absolute existential change that happened in the 90s with the Japanese in manufacturing. And you just see that this was the prowess of German manufacturing was all through their system of how they trained and developed talent on the manufacturing mechanism. So a 40-year-old Mercedes car was a fantastic car because everybody who put that thing together was an absolute master assembler, and all the materials that were used were of high integral quality. And if you take a look at a Japanese car from the 90s that also has an amazing reputation for quality, it's just the opposite. The workers, there was no Japanese car industry in 1960. There was no manufacturing in the 1950s and 60s. We thought about that as Chinese products we thought about 10 years ago. And the way that worked was all through this continuous improvement, consistency. Make it consistent before you make it great. Make it consistently bad before you make it consistently good. And what this allowed them to do was to bring in staff up quicker with less experience, less lead time, and that allowed them to use lower quality, lower cost materials and lower cost techniques to assemble something. So you no longer had this dependency on the master technicians. So this absolutely ripped through Germany, ripped through the United States, and completely changed how everybody does manufacturing. And that's, ISO 9000. This is a way of life. Plan, do, check, act. Right? This is it. The upside is this allows us to communicate and transfer jobs faster. But the amazing thing is, in reality, there's still big barriers, right? You'll see a factory that has 3 or 4 different lines. You'll see that there's very few people that move from one line to the other. There's still lots of training that is training versus work instruction. This is maybe this is something also we could talk about, which is, this idea that we have the way we do it and sort of just-in-time training. We give them the instruction and remind them of the instruction. And again, we're focused on do it consistently. There's the right way, the wrong way, and the way we're doing it today. The way the instructions tell me to do it today. This is the mentality of modern manufacturing. And, this whole continuous improvement is based on the fact that you do it consistently, you document it, and it's always, always, always done that way. So that documentation is a huge burden. And there's certain things that are just really, really hard to do. And eventually it comes down to training. And we use video in training pretty regularly. That's now commonplace. Work instructions still primarily text. I mean, you guys are trying to change that. And you do see the trend in the industry. But certain things like, how do you check and clean a filter? How about quality inspection? What are you looking for in terms of defects and what are you checking? Super hard to communicate in a piece of paper.
I will give you one example from real life. It's practically impossible to create instructions how to tie shoelaces with the text and photos. Yeah. But it's really easy to make a recording of that video.
And back to my souffle with my kids, right? How do you whip the eggs? And what does that need to look like, right? There is a lot of science and there's art. When it's pure science, it's easy to do the text. When it's science and art or a complex thing, it's nearly impossible. And you see where the trend is going. And where this comes in is when you want somebody to be flexible and going from line 1, line 2, right? And we've been talking about big trends over long periods of time, but short-term trends, right now there's a lot of instability in terms of manufacturing demand, right? Tariffs are popping up, supply chains are getting reconfigured, some recessionary signals popping up here and there. And, some of the manufacturing I'm involved in, you do see this situation where suddenly they're having to run 3 shifts, not 1. But that 3 shifts is not for all 3 lines, or not even for 1 line always. So you need a second shift for line A, and then next month you need a second shift for line B. Now you need workers who can go across 2 lines. That's really problematic. Now, in the past, we'd solve that just by spending the money, right? It just makes you less efficient. You would be more efficient and you would save money if you did that. And that's still probably true. But right now, when you can't get all the workers you need and the training burden is so high, this is problematic and you can't hold them.
Yeah, maybe COVID changed this even more. So you came to work in the morning and you work in a planning department and you find out that 5 people did not come. Maybe their kids were sick or they caught COVID. So you had to improvise a lot. So basically people's getting a skill and competency and managing all that was super problematic during the COVID. And now because of the inconsistencies in demand, this is basically a continuing trend.
I mean, absolutely. Some of the manufacturing companies I was involved in, one had 20% of their workforce out on sick leave. This is another trend, right? Women in the workforce. So in like food production, pharmaceutical, you see a lot of women. And then in terms of primary, when their children get sick or parents get sick, they're the ones who have to stay home and take care of them. And that company saw 20% of their staff out for more than 3 months. Huge. Right, that's sort of unprecedented. So the good news is, in terms of what we're having to deal with now, in terms of demand uncertainty, this was all well trained and well stress tested during COVID, and then following that with supply chain issues. I mean, planning has been manufacturing. This has been one of the areas that's completely been under pressure. This has been crazy. Again, manufacturing has, especially here in Europe, has been this slow, general, long-term continuous improvement going for 5 years. And what you've seen in the past 4 years or so, since COVID, is 5-year planning is out. We need to be able to find solutions quick. And now that's been really interesting to see that trend where what we're looking for in terms of a solution and who's going to provide the solution and how the solution is going to be decided. And, gone is the 3-year budgeting plan and selection process that takes 1.5 years and the 2-year implementation and the 5-year payoff. That's gone, right? That nobody's got patience for that. And what you see is just a lot of people who come up with a lot of more agile solutions and things that solve problems right away. And that's been a great thing for competitiveness, I think, in the European and the US markets.
You mentioned language barriers. Maybe we should return to this topic a little bit. So I recently came back from a trip in US. So I visited a couple of factories and their language barriers are not problematic. Most of the people speak English. It's the first language of the world. And they have some Mexicans or from Latin America, so Spanish is obviously the second language, but this is not their problem. Europe is very diverse, also language-wise, and nowadays it's not only 20 plus languages we speak here in Europe, but we simply do not have enough talent. We don't have enough technicians. We don't have enough workers here in Europe. So workers usually come now from Asia. So the language barriers are even bigger. We work with companies that have 30 plus languages.
In the same company.
In the same company.
I mean,
in the same factory.
On the same factory floor, 30 plus countries.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Yeah. I think from an American perspective, it's relatively simple, right? Which is you'd have a lot of Spanish speakers and you'd have English speakers, and English and Spanish are relatively understood. So for example, on a construction site, it is possible that Spanish is the language in the United States. And as I understand, here in Germany or in Europe, large parts of Europe, things like sort of a Serbian, Croatian language might often be the language of choice for a lot of that. But in manufacturing, it's really interesting that you see, for example, some countries have been very good at embracing immigrants in the workforce. So, and then others not so much. So you would see, for example, Spain, most of their immigrants would come from Latin America rather than, say, from Eastern Europe. So that simplifies the problem there. But places like Austria, right, you have Slovakian language, but then you also have other immigrants that are coming in. And as you pointed out, Middle East, Asian immigrants, completely different language families, totally different set of problems. And the probability that you have a line manager or a shop floor manager that can accommodate even 2 or 3 of those languages is really, really low.
Yeah, it's practically impossible, and they don't speak English as well. So video is, let's say, an obvious solution to many of the problems we mentioned, but why? Pictures
would as well, right? And this is the other thing is manufacturing is heavily towards text and drawings and text and drawings, right? Even the picture is a relatively avant-garde idea in manufacturing. Right? It's almost always mechanical drawings that can be signed off in an old school way with the approval process and all of that. While a picture is, even that alone is hard in some organizations to figure out what's the approval process, what's the release process, what's the distribution process. So you see this heavy reliance on ancient old school text, right? Where printed, and you see this, you walk lots of manufacturing floors of reasonably successful companies, and there's big stacks of paper pinned up on the wall. It's just amazing that we're still in that world.
We say that pictures tell more than 1,000 words, but definitely also video tells more than 1,000 pictures. But why video is still not present? So we known cameras for 30 plus years. Why is video not present on the shop floor?
So I think there's a couple reasons. One is the manufacturing shop floor can be a really nasty place, or it can be a highly controlled place. So for example, a million years in my history, I was designing equipment for manufacturing, and you had explosion-proof environments, and you had liquid and temperature ranges, right? These are often places where you can't just buy an Android tablet, and just throw it up on the wall and off you go. Second thing is security. You do see that manufacturing. So when you do, like I was talking to somebody else about it, industrial embedded software versus commercial, consumer embedded software. Industrial embedded software has to run for at least 6 months without resetting, without an error, one error, not one tiny error in 6 months. It's nearly impossible. And that's the manufacturing world. So they don't care how feature-rich it is. They don't want to be delighted with a great user interface, but they need this absolutely rock-solid, simple thing. And they want things that they can buy replacement parts for long periods of time. So there's this huge reluctance to use things like cloud services or putting tablets on the workstations. And so once a computer gets in place, that's the machine. And I would guess that probably something like, massive percentage of Windows XT is still running in manufacturing plant floors, right? Because security and stability, those are the two things that they cherish the most. And now you want to do a video on a machine like that? I mean, I don't know how you guys handle it, but I'm just amazed. Highly successful companies that don't have any digital tablets to give instructions, even if it's printed, or tracking time, or tracking quality results. I mean, again, paper. Who's using more paper than manufacturing? It's government and manufacturing. These are the two.
I agree.
And maybe insurance companies. I don't know, banks maybe.
But you also mentioned that, so the distribution was impossible 20, 30 years ago. Nowadays, you have industrial tablets. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. You can, in a lot of environments, you can use simple Android tablets. You have all of the smart devices. Machine terminals nowadays have a decent hardware. So this distribution is becoming more simple, and it's becoming cheaper. The other part is the capturing of good content. This nowadays is also made possible with action cameras, with smartphones.
Yeah, but the action camera crowd is not the manufacturing management crowd, right? Those are not the same people, right? The action camera crowd is a younger audience. It's a more open and inclusive and engaged and social audience. Manufacturing people, by and large, that's not where they come from, right? There's a difference. And so it's been slow to trickle down to them. I mean, it's amazing. I forgot who was telling me this, that most manufacturing workers don't have email addresses.
No, they don't.
They don't have corporate email. Yeah, you can confirm that. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing. So, why is that? And I remember checking it, and I also got the same information. It's, they're running old school Microsoft stuff where they pay per user, and it just doesn't make sense to have the terminals and to have the emails for these people. So when there's an HR change, they physically do paper.
Yep. The thing is, Active Directory accounts are expensive, so that's why workers generally do not have digital identity.
So it's the Active Directory more than the email address itself.
Yeah, it's all connected. So the user and the email address. So
right.
It's that's the main reason. Yeah.
And back to my point earlier, which is IT organizations in manufacturing environments, they're just risk areas for the most part, right? New technology doesn't improve them immediately, but every piece of software that goes into an IT organization is a potential risk, right? If that software goes down, does the factory go down? If there's a security breach with that, what does that cause? And so, back in my day, a steel mill would lose $60,000 an hour.
Yep. Right.
I mean, one shutdown of one of the computers is $60,000 an hour until you get everything back up online. And it's just, that makes them very, very risk averse in kind of the same way that air traffic controllers are super risk averse.
There's also another thing. Companies have started a lot of new IT projects, but generally 50% of them were not successful. Yeah. And they say, this was not software, this was shelfware. It's something we bought, but never used.
Yeah. I mean, you could say a lot of this also in the enterprise, that historically, this is one of the reasons why the subscription model was embraced by both sides early on, is because I think it was back in the day, Hewlett-Packard software. I think they said more than 1/3 of their software was shelfware. And then again, this is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands purchases. Mm-hmm. In manufacturing, I think it's worse, right? Because there's so much that has to change, and there's so much downside and risk, right? Anytime you do, that I often think about, there's 3 costs to buying something, right? There's the euros you're going to spend buying whatever it is. There's the management bandwidth that's going to need to follow this all the way through and make sure that it actually comes to completion successfully and everybody buys in and all the right people are there and people understand what we're trying to do. And then there's the last thing, which is business risk. And this is why everybody hates their ERP but never changes their ERP or MES system in manufacturing. Very few people are really excited about their MES system, and very few people think they probably have the optimal solution. But the idea of changing it is just, the business risk is just huge, and the management bandwidth even more. So even if they got paid $1 million to change, most of them would choose not to.
So what's the difference between when an enterprise buys software compared to manufacturing company buying software?
Yeah, I've worked both sides. And one of the big things is when enterprise buys software, it's about how the software is going to stay current and what capabilities it's going to bring, right? So the ERP that we implement, or the CRM system we implement in an enterprise, we're going to use 10% of it. But the idea that there's all these other things and new things coming down with the updates, this is what makes my business flexible and being able to do something in the future. And anybody that's ever built their own in-house enterprise software knows how they get bit about 4 years down the road. Manufacturing software, on the other hand, the requirements are pretty rigid, right? There is so many things around it. This is not necessarily a what if. How about if we try culture, right? Those tests and those things are done in a very structured way and need to be controlled, right? And so as a result, I know what I need. I know with reasonably good certainty for some time. And I tend to go old school with, here's my specification, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. And as soon as I solve it, that's probably going to be good for the next 5 years. So I'm not looking for a lot of upside and a lot of flexibility and a lot of things. I'm looking for flexibility to accommodate my existing processes. That's the other thing that happens in manufacturing, which is we said everything is documented, ISO 9000. That means there's a lot of things that need to change. And back to your point before, which is, what's keeping software from being deployed in manufacturing? What I'm seeing a lot of is there's so many other systems that all need to be done right? If we're startup culture, the Silicon Valley boys, they just go buy something, sort of integrate it, throw it out, declare death, do a data bankruptcy, move forward. This sort of thing is the absolute opposite of where manufacturing is, right? Everything must have an incremental way of getting there. You can't do it in one step. And I see this as, so when we want to change any kind of component, we have to figure out all the integration consequences, all the security consequences, all the operational consequences. So this just seems like a huge barrier. I don't know how you guys are addressing this, because this is huge, right?
Yep.
How do you there is no such thing as a cheap subscription that's quickly deployed in manufacturing, as far as I know.
So generally, I can say, in my experience, sales cycles in manufacturing are long, but there's a reason, because it's not only the money you pay, that's the easy part. It's also the management bandwidth and the business risk. So you really need to be sure what you're doing before you do it. So that's why we also had to adapt our basically sales process. Nowadays, companies would like to test the software using as the least amount of time possible, to decrease the business risk and the management bandwidth. So what we do nowadays is basically we offer a 3-week proof of concept to the potential customer, which means this is like a 3-week short implementation with one goal, that if the company is willing to spend 5 to 10 hours in those 3 weeks, they will get a definite answer. In sales, usually the yes, if you get a yes, that's the best one. But I don't know is the second best one. Obviously, you can keep the company in the pipeline, so it's still a potentially a client. But for us, there are only 2 answers, yes or no.
Yeah.
So the no is obviously the second one. But in 3 weeks, companies can definitely decide if they want to continue using REWO or not. They can see the creation process. They can test it out. They can see if with the work instructions on the shop floor work or they don't. They perform a simple test. They bring in an operator or somebody without skills from human resources. They give him or her good video instructions that they created during those 3 weeks, and they see if that person can cold start a machine or maybe perform a preventative maintenance process.
This is interesting for me because, of course, the idea of doing a pilot, this is standard operating procedure for every manufacturing, right? You're always going to do a proof of concept or a pilot. Then you're going to get approval from the capital approval board, and you have to submit all the stuff and get the final stamp. So I can imagine so sales cycles are miserable. So that pilot or that proof of concept, this has been around forever, and this is how they roll.
We had to simplify it. That's the key thing that we did. We simplified it, we shortened it, and like I said, we have no bullshit approach, which means it's free of charge. We basically are willing to risk and invest time into the project free of charge because we really believe in it. So that's the difference we made.
Again, the free of charge access to software, also not radically different. What are you guys doing? I mean, so you're doing this in a couple weeks. One of the things I often see in manufacturing is they do a proof of concept or they do a pilot, and you come back with a spreadsheet of 75 evaluations that doesn't make decision-making any easier. I've been on the board of a couple manufacturing companies, and, we come back with this board presentation of all the things it does well and all the things it doesn't do well, and here's what the price is, and here's this, and it's like, it feels like we went through the motions but don't know anything. This is how long it took us to learn how to do this. This is how well it integrates in with X. Well, did we think there was ever going to be a problem integrating with X? And do we think learning is one of the major risks? So I'm constantly finding myself in this situation where the pilots just are kind of useless and slow. And I've also been on the other side where the software, we're doing pilots, the customers take forever, and in the end, they're no closer to a decision. How are you guys, have you been able to make a sizable improvement on that?
Yeah, like I said, it's only 3 weeks. Every company at the end can make a decision. It's easy. It's an easy one since the whole process is well designed. So
you're designing the pilot as opposed to the client?
Yes. So we basically help them. That's why we start with the first workshop. Basically, companies teach us what are their problems, how they work, what kind of production they run. So basically, they teach us. And then we help together with them. We design the process, the whole 3-week process. We guide them into the right direction. So because video instructions don't necessarily work everywhere in every field. So we try to find areas where we really know that this will work, and then at the end we help them with the estimation how much this will improve their processes.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think that this is also where pilots go bad. From being on the buying side and seeing these from the other side is usually the technical people are great at understanding technical obstacles, and users understand learning obstacles. But nobody's focused on what's the long-term value. We'll get through the technical problems and the learning issues if the value is there. And usually what I see a lot is that this kind of pilot or this kind of proof of concept is usually really poor at uncovering and quantifying the value. It sounds like you guys have worked a bit in that area.
So our product is very easy to use, and we can train the person in 60 minutes. But then if we just simply give them the product and give them 3 weeks, nothing will happen. Or in a lot of cases, nothing will happen. So basically good to devise a good plan, and at the end, try to estimate what are the potential savings in the next 24 months and this kind of stuff. We need to help them with that. Companies, it's their first project for us. We have a couple of hundreds POCs behind us, and for us, we have more experience with that.
You guys are actually, I think, driving the a bit more the pilot or the proof of concept. Is that right?
Yeah, in our experience, it's really easy to teach and train people how to use the product, and that's something we always confirm. But we need to help companies. In our experience, we need to design the process. That's why we start with value workshop. That's the start of the POC, of the proof of concept. So we need to find where REWO can actually bring value. So either this is, so we need to find an area, which is problematic for the company. And if REWO or the video in general is really,
and this would be where you do the actual where the proof of concept is focused on, or this is just something so that when you submit the product, so that when the client's team submits it for their capital approval, they can answer the question they almost never can answer, which is what's the value, what's the return on investment, or is it both of those things?
I would say both.
Okay, good. So value workshop. This is interesting. So you're probing for where the value is. What are you typically looking for?
Either some certain companies have problem with quality. Mm-hmm. So if they want to improve the quality, we focus on that field. So how we could standardize and improve the process. In certain cases, it's they have a lot of scrap. So that's again a good field where you can easily estimate what are the potential savings for the company. Certain companies, we talked about this, have problem with high fluctuation. So you can solve the problem with, with certain activities that the companies, that the workers will not leave the company. But another thing is you need to decrease the onboarding time. And you can do this easily with work instructions.
And you also mentioned something about video is not optimal for all cases. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, of course, certain processes are very straightforward. So you just need 3 bullets and that's it. You have a controlled document. If you have an audit, you can prove that you have a standardized process. And but for certain processes, they are too complex. So in these cases, video is much, much better. For example, you mentioned cleaning.
Yep.
It's really hard to define how something is properly cleaned, but it's really easy to record it.
Got it. And I imagine also how you clean must be really difficult to document.
Yeah, of course. Cleaning hands in pharmaceutical industry, it's hard to define it because everybody thinks this is cleaning hands, but there you really need to go. They really have a process, and I can assure you it's impossible to describe it and put a few photos there.
Are you guys in the medical space? I mean, I imagine surgeons have the exact same issue with nurses and surgeons scrubbing in.
So maybe the problem is the environment where we come from, because everything is basically, we have public healthcare. So it's without proper connections, it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
But we are trying abroad where they have more, where they have higher share of private healthcare. We are actually trying out this a little bit.
Interesting, but kind of a distraction. Good. So, I mean, so the value workshop, you're focused on a couple things, which is the where will video make an improvement? And does that improvement fix a fundamental problem they need fixing?
Exactly.
And that goes back to the trend I was picking up before, which is that manufacturing is no longer doing 3 years of planning and selection and then 2 years of implementation and 5 years of payoff. You mentioned 24 months. And selection processes I'm seeing are much faster and much more focused on an immediate need. The thing I think about is, again, being on a board in a manufacturing company, what's that unscheduled last-minute insertion into the board conversation? Is it Red Sea shipping issues? Is it supply chain? Is it recruiting? Is it people on sick leave? All of these need to be fixed now. They weren't budgeted. You haven't been researching them for 2 years. We need to do something with or without technology in the next months. I don't know if you're seeing similar trends.
Yeah, yeah. So the constant nowadays is that the world is changing much faster, and manufacturing, I see this field, I don't know, in the previous 20, 30 years as a very pragmatic, slow to adapt. But as the world is evolving, also this space now has to change really quickly. In 2020, in February, you came to work, everything was okay. In March, you had problems, like you said, 20% of the work staff was not there. Everybody had to become more flexible, working in a totally different field. Somebody was assembling, and now next day working in maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think COVID was a real hit to the head for a lot of the slow movers. You saw every bank had to have an electronic signature now, not in 3 years, now.
And yeah, and this is like this how things are happening much faster. How things are changing is basically a new constant. So yeah, we see that. So in a lot of cases, companies say we don't have a budget, but nowadays it's easier to find budget than before. Everything was budgeted for 5 years or 2 years in advance.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if something really brings value and you can prove that, they will find the budget. If you can prove them that this will save them X euros and you're only it's only costing them 10% of that, they will find the budget. So that's also the whole budgeting process changed.
Yeah,
it had to.
I think that's totally true. I think it's such a luxury for a manufacturing company to be able to say, yeah, we're going to set aside 15% of our retained revenue for ongoing continuous improvement processes and go ahead and just start stack ranking them. That's such a luxury. I think that's kind of old school thinking. I think it's all about, how do you fix the bottom line? How do you protect what's going on? How do you counter something we need to deal with? And I think that's absolutely true. That one of the big trends I see in the industry of manufacturing is flexibility.
Flexibility, yes.
Right? This is it, right? So not only can I produce a high quality product at a low cost, but am I flexible? Can I deal with new suppliers? Can I deal with changing workforce? Can I cross-train my people? Can I deal with a shutdown and a restart and somehow manage to keep the whole thing going? And I think we're still not sure, but boy, they've been battle tested over the past 4 years with all the logistics, shipping, COVID. I don't think manufacturing's seen something like this since, wartime.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned medical spaces in certain cases regarding standards really comparable to GMP and pharma industry. So how do you see pharmaceutical industry? Slow to adapt, or did that change?
I mean, my experience with pharmaceutical is they are very insular, right? That they live within their world. They have GMP requirements. Typically, cost of production is not how they differentiate. You do see some different contract manufacturing, perhaps, but often it's about quality and delivery. These things are more valuable than an extra an extra 3% on the price, right? Because the difference between the price at the retail level and the price at the production level is so big that usually and again, lots of registration, lots of consequences of getting it wrong. So I think they come across this quite a bit different, right? If you think about construction material, it's all about price. And if the quality is off, okay, we'll deal with that. And you're willing to sacrifice some quality for getting the cost right. I think in pharmaceutical, it's just the opposite. And then, of course, automotive is somewhere in between. You need both the cost and the quality. Pharmaceutical, it's about quality first, or flexibility first, or consistency first. Again, highly regulated. Like pharmaceutical, if you wanted to change your supplier for who's doing the contract manufacturing, this is a whole registration and certification process. That is not a quick change.
Yeah, we have the same experience. So a lot of industries adapted REWO and VIDA work instructions as their only basically documentation, which is being audited and so on. So basically, the processes are defined with video work instructions. In pharmaceutical industry, they use REWO as job aid, meaning the subject of an audit would be existing work instructions on paper, and video is only a job aid to train the people. But we are now seeing a little shift because REWO is compliant with all industry standards, and they can also use it. For example, one Slovenian pharmaceutical company is using REWO on Russian market also as in the audit process. So this is slowly changing. Maybe I can. So we talked about POC. So POC, I see it as a small implementation. It's a project which takes 3 weeks, but has the same stages as an actual project that will happen in 24 months. So basically, how we started with a kickoff. So basically, it's similar to a value workshop where a company teaches us which areas, which departments are problematic, which problems they would like to solve. Basically, we find those areas where REWO can really bring the highest value. Then, of course, we do the training of the staff, of the users, and we do the admin workshops. So basically, we help administrators set up all the things regarding the user management, access management, and so on. And then the really important part is customer success management, because we mentioned that a lot of software becomes shelfware because maybe company does not have the right project manager, but we need to be better than that. We need to help them with running the project, managing the project. So customer success management means the customer needs to be successful. This is a SaaS product. It's a subscription based, which means in 24 months, we would like to extend the contract. So companies need to have good KPIs. Manufacturing companies in the last years made a lot of money. They have high profits, higher than before, probably, but they are still not willing to spend money on things that do not bring value. So every 2 years, we need to convince them with good KPIs that this is a good project and they should continue working on it. So
you mentioned something before where that you had some users that are bringing their work instructions into your system. Is that because you guys are some big complex document management system now, or is this something else that's driving that?
basically, yeah, REWO is document management system with video editor. It's video first, obviously the best software on the market to create video instructions, but it's the idea is different. So companies nowadays have thousands of documents for the manufacturing processes. This was huge investment they made in the last 10, 20, 30 years. And we would like to help them transfer this content to REWO. So basically, REWO instructions are not generally only videos. It's a combination of video, text, and photos. So we help these companies to import these documents with the AI. We will try to help them to create REWO instructions. And what do you get out of it? Imagine you now have a Word document in one language. It's really hard. So you translate this document to another 10 languages. You have 10 documents. Then you would like to update the version to version 2. You have to manage 10 different documents. So that's nowadays hard with existing document management systems. And REWO really simplifies that. You import the document with automatic translations. You're still working on one document in 10 different languages. And with automatic translations, AI is nowadays getting better and better with that. So it's really easy to manage, control the documents in multiple languages. So I would say REWO instructions are always divided into steps. Step can be a slide with text. Step can be a video with subtitles and annotations. Step can be a photo with markers and so on. So it's a combination of all different formats. Matt, what are the trends nowadays in manufacturing with work instructions? So you said that the biggest breakthrough, the bigger advancement are the photos, the images.
Yeah. I mean, surprisingly, it is photos and PDF. This is probably the big breakthrough. And you do see video like yourselves. We are seeing more and more of that. They tried in the past and it took them a while to get it. I think the other thing is, and I'm not sure how you guys are handling this, but I think the idea that there is a process that's suitable for video, and there's another process that's suitable for a picture, and there's another process that's suitable for text is probably kind of an oversimplification. I mean, don't we have situations where part of the process is going to be best communicated with a video, part of the process is going to be best communicated with a good still picture with maybe some annotation, and part of the process is maybe just a bunch of text like I might put on a slide or in a document.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we help companies to import existing content and they can improve it. So existing work instructions, and they can improve it. Maybe 10 steps are okay, but step number 11 has to be a video. So they can update it, upgrade it, and without investing too much time to create fully new instructions.
We talked about YouTube videos and how they're great in terms of instructional, how to make a souffle and how to do my dishwasher filter. And then, the editors that people use to make a YouTube video, is that the same kind of editor that people are using in manufacturing?
No. Obviously, we have different. So, in engineers, in certain cases, operators, people from human resources create instructions, and they don't have knowledge in video production. So it needs to be simple. Probably 80% less features compared to Adobe Premiere or some sophisticated system, but it needs to be simple and fast.
So beauty is not the primary goal.
No, it's not a marketing material that you would like to create. Basically, video instructions first have to be divided into steps. If I would like to repeat one step, it needs to be easy. I cannot scroll on the timeline to do it once again. On the other hand, if you divide videos to steps, you have traceability, which steps you watched, and every step has to be confirmed. So I have to confirm that I watched the step, and my boss can has full traceability where, when, and what I actually watched.
So your system, in terms of a video, is also going to keep the quality records of the actual process quality.
So that's the second part of the answer. Yeah, you need the whole system. So YouTube is basically a delivery platform. It doesn't have editing functionality. REWO has everything, so you can easily edit video instructions. On the other hand, as I said, it's a whole system. So it's a controlled system where you have the versioning control, where you have approval workflow. So somebody with knowledge about the process will review it, send it then maybe to the management to make the final approval. You can easily track which workers watch instructions. If you are ISO company, you need to prove when you have an audit that the worker actually received the newest version of the instructions with their signature. So here you also have digital signatures. So there's a lot of these small components which makes it a system for ISO companies.
Yeah, and as I recall, some of the early video I ever saw tried to deploy, what were the barriers, right? It was equipment to actually show the thing. It was the barriers to use something like an Adobe Premiere or Microsoft Movie. And then in terms of the distribution, you would use something like Microsoft Media Server. And again, controlling who had access, that was relatively easy. But I remember some of these early implementations of video, you would have problems of how do you know that this is the right one, right? Any ISO audit, how do I know this is the right one? How do you know that the product was built using that final version? And those two answers, normal Microsoft video distribution couldn't answer that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably also the answer why we do not have video nowadays as a standard in 20 to 30% of the processes where it actually makes sense to have a video in. But I would say a little bit less than 10 years ago, companies saw VR and AR as the next step, skipping the video from images to AR and VR.
I can remember being at the Hanover Messe and seeing all these Google Glass was the first iterations, and then you saw some of the later versions. Boy, all this stuff has been really good for innovation officers and for board reports. But is anybody actually using that stuff?
No, but good question. So this brings us to our basically how the company started. So 10 years ago, we started with VR. That's where the virtual and augmented reality, that's where the name of the company comes from. And Collector, as our investor and a co-owner, basically gave us an opportunity to test out our first product, VR 360, on the shop floor. And we also experimented a lot with augmented reality and Microsoft HoloLens. The architect of the HoloLens is actually also one of the investors in our company. So we got basically an early access to the alpha and beta products. So what we noticed is that the acceptance on the shop floor was not good. It actually made the distribution even more complex. And on the other hand, creation of the content was much harder. If the process engineer was creating instructions before, now you need a software engineer to do that. Of course, AI and all that stuff simplified it, but in reality, video solves 90% of the problems you had with text and images. It's only slightly better, but much more expensive, and in terms of content creation and distribution.
So you guys actually made a hard pivot away from AR, VR, and just trying to figure out how to get video into the...
Yeah, actually that's how, like I said, we started with that. We had few deployments. We created a whole product, the whole system for it. And then we pivoted, we went back. We see that manufacturing companies are slower to adapt. They are very pragmatic, so they don't jump. So yeah, you have innovation officers, so they have some kind of theater, and they try to show how they are advanced and how they adopt new technologies. But in reality, when you go to the shop floor, you see that there are still binders next to the machines with all the papers. So yeah, that's how we started, and then we pivoted and we started with video. So Collector said we would like to have a simple editor to create video instructions in a controlled way, but there's nothing on the market. Nowadays we have competition, but back then in 2017 there was no software for manufacturing company with 1,000+ employees so the company could easily create and distribute and manage the content.
I think that's really great. I mean, you talk about just that pragmatism of stepping away from the sexy AR, VR at the time and just trying to figure out what was the barrier to old school video, getting on the shop floor and making that work. I mean, that's a pretty gutsy move to make that shift from the sexy to normalize the current. And I think I see the same thing right now with AI. I see people trying to pitch AI in every aspect of manufacturing, and it's going to revolutionize. And you see all these pilots, but none of these pilots turn into something productive. I mean, that the AI projects that are trying to move to production, there's just very, very few. And where you see them, they're often hidden. And I think you said you guys were doing a bit of AI in terms of translation work and I think a few other key areas, which I think is super smart because you're picking the proven low-risk areas.
Yeah. Also, as you said, a lot of AI projects, companies don't have organized data, structured data, and not enough data so the AI could actually work. But in our case, yeah, the AI is our focus. We can really well translate text, so you can have instructions in 30+ languages. We can transform voice to the subtitles and from the subtitles to the voice. We can cut video instructions 2 steps automatically. In Europe, GDPR is major thing. So if you can see people's faces in the videos, you need to blur them out. So we can recognize faces and blur them automatically with face recognition. And now the biggest focus is how to help companies use existing content, existing documentation they have in document management systems. I made an estimation that company has from 0.5 to 4 instructions per employee. So you can imagine a company with 1,000 people usually has in average 2,000 documents.
And this is work instructions. So this is what you're using when you're actually in production. But then there's training material. What else is there that also has the same issues?
Especially training material. So, and we would like to help companies to basically transform this from existing content, which was usually created in Word or Excel or PowerPoint in some kind of Microsoft tool, to REWO. I already mentioned that managing all that content is hard nowadays. With REWO, it's much easier. So that's the part where we would like to deploy AI the most. How to basically transform existing content to REWO.
But so is REWO an AI company? Are you guys leading the charge and coming out with the latest LLM models and solving? No,
basically you have thousands of people working on that field at Microsoft, at OpenAI, and so on. So what we try to do is we follow what's the major trends, and we use existing solutions. We plug it to the REWO. And
so again, same philosophy as you did with AR, VR, which is how do you use the proven tech? How do you get the proven technology that doesn't exist deployed rather than trying to take the unproven technology and deploying it?
Exactly.
Yeah, this is really smart. So there's another question I want to ask. So when we talk about this multimodal, video, modern stuff, who's this not for? Where is video not appropriate consistently? We said certain processes that are text only, but then we sort of worked into this idea of kind of this hybrid mix. But what kinds of companies or what parts of production areas is this kind of approach, this video first or video multimodal, not so appropriate?
So there are companies, or let's say at least departments in certain companies where they have a stable workforce. So usually also a little bit older workforce where the processes have been defined 30, 40 years ago. The processes did not change. There is no need to basically, they're still working on the 30-year-old version of the work instructions. There's not a lot of people coming into the company, and the people are not leaving the company. So
and this would be like legacy manufacturing lines.
Manufacturing. So probably every year they have less orders. That's why they don't also invest their bandwidth into that. So in these cases, there is no need to basically adopt REWO. But if the company is like automotive industry, every 4 years or 7 years, you have a new headlight. So you have a higher fluctuation. We have cycles, but in generally the business is bigger and bigger. Companies are employing new workers. So in these cases, it makes much more sense. And since there's no workforce on domestic market, they basically European manufacturing is relying on immigrants. So you also have the language barriers, and video itself. It contains much more information, so it means you need less text. So video is basically an universal language.
Yeah.
Everybody speaks.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you reduce the language dependency. And also, just again, talking to my own kids, there's just a reluctance to read even food labels. There really is shocking how little the younger generation reads. And actually, if I'm being fair with myself, it's been a while since I read a book, and I used to be a regular reader.
One of the things I use ChatGPT the most is basically if I have a long document, I put it in and say, give me a short summary of the document. And that brings us also to the next thing. So attention deficit disorder was basically a problem of chemistry in the brains. But nowadays we are with these short formats like YouTube Shorts. The YouTube video was too long. Now it needs to be short. With TikTok, everything needs to be short. So we're creating attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if you said, okay, the only workers I can hire are those who don't have an addiction to TikTok, good luck. Good luck finding the young ones that don't have an addiction to TikTok and don't need to be fed stimulus. This is a real problem. And I do like that idea. So when you talked about videos, they're not just videos, right? You have videos with steps or chapters or whatever you called them, right? And I guess there is probably some real skill that needs to be there in terms of how you design a video. Do manufacturing companies know intuitively how to do that, or is this something you have to do a lot of training, or they need to hire specialists? How does this normally happen?
They generally don't hire a specialist. It requires some training and learning by doing. So when they create the third, fourth instruction, they basically know how this should go. And it's also very important that we have good customer success management. So basically we follow them, we help them, we have regular calls, we review what they create. We give them, basically, since we have more experience with that, we are working with a lot of companies, we can give them good advice. So we can suggest them how to improve it. So yeah,
So it should be things like annotations, cuts, voiceovers, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. How to also create content shorter. So it's really important that if the process it takes 1 hour to maybe cold start a machine, how to create instructions that can cover all the steps without losing a meaning in, let's say, 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, what was the poet or the writer who said in a letter to his mother, I'm writing you a long letter because I don't have time to write you a short one. It probably does take more time to make a short, concise video work instruction than a long one. I'm sure in text for sure.
Not necessarily. So we have a couple of smart features that can simplify it. But in generally, it's hard to create something as a concise text. Maybe it's easier to do it with a video.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is the less you say or do or produce, the easier it is to maintain, right? So if you have 4 steps that are 15 seconds each, what does it take to update and maintain those going forward is a whole lot easier than if you took a 1-hour process and turned it into a 45-minute video.
Exactly, I agree. Yeah, Matt, thanks for today's conversation. Thank you for watching and see you next time.